My beloved, do not rush past these words. Something has been trying to reach the quietest part of your heart, and what you are about to hear may explain why your emotions have felt unusually heavy, strangely alert, or impossible to ignore. There is a reason this message found you now. Not because you are meant to panic. Not because something terrible is waiting. But because a truth that has been held back for far too long is beginning to move toward the surface, and the person connected to your heart is standing at the edge of a confession they no longer know how to keep inside. Your soulmate has been carrying words they almost spoke before. More than once, they imagined the moment. They pictured your face. They wondered whether you would stay, whether you would understand, whether you would hear the meaning beneath the sentences instead of only hearing the mistakes. Yet every time courage rose inside them, fear followed closely behind. They told themselves there would be another day, another opportunity, another perfect moment when everything would somehow be easier. But the perfect moment never came, and now they have begun to understand something that unsettles them deeply. Silence can become its own decision. That is why their heart is saying, "Please hear me out one last time." Those words may sound final, but the truth behind them is not what you think. They are not necessarily preparing to disappear. They are not simply closing a door. Something far more emotional is happening beneath the surface. They are reaching the point where pretending no longer feels possible. The distance, the confusion, the unfinished conversations, the moments when pride spoke louder than tenderness, everything has been building toward this. And what they want to reveal is not only about what happened between you. It is about what was happening inside them while you were trying to understand their silence. You may have asked yourself why they became difficult to read. Why they seemed warm one moment and distant the next. Why they could make you feel deeply seen and then suddenly act as though nothing mattered. You may have wondered whether you imagined the connection, whether you cared more, whether they simply moved on without looking back. But there was something you could not see. Behind that changing behavior was a private battle they never explained. They were afraid of how much you mattered. And that fear changed the way they handled everything. Some people become brave when love enters their life. Others become uncertain because love exposes every place inside them that still feels unfinished. Your soulmate did not expect your presence to bring so many hidden emotions to the surface. They thought they understood themselves. They thought they knew what they wanted. They believed they could control the pace, the depth, the vulnerability. Then something about you reached beyond the boundaries they had carefully built, and suddenly they were feeling things they had spent years learning how not to feel. That is where the confusion began. There were moments when they wanted to move closer to you, but the intensity frightened them. There were times when they nearly told you everything, only to become quiet because they feared that saying too much would give you the power to hurt them. They may have looked calm, but inside, old memories were waking up. Old disappointments. Old betrayals. Old promises from people who had once said they would stay and then walked away. None of those memories were created by you, yet you found yourself standing in the shadow of them. And they know that now. This is part of what they want to confess. They realize you may have paid an emotional price for wounds you did not create. That realization has been following them. In the quietest moments, when there is no conversation to distract them and no activity to hide behind, they remember specific things. A message they answered too coldly. A moment when you needed reassurance and they gave you distance instead. A time when you tried to understand them, but they assumed you were judging them. A conversation they replay differently now because they finally see what you were actually trying to say. And there is one memory in particular that keeps returning. You may not even realize how important that moment became to them. It was a moment when you showed sincerity without demanding anything in return. Perhaps you were patient when they expected anger. Perhaps you spoke gently when they were prepared for conflict. Perhaps you stayed respectful even when you had every reason to protect yourself. Whatever the exact moment was, they noticed more than they admitted. At the time, they acted as though it meant little. But later, when they were alone, it became impossible to forget. That moment began changing something inside them. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But slowly. They started comparing the way you treated them with the way other people had treated them before. They began recognizing the difference between someone who merely wanted access to their life and someone who genuinely cared about their heart. They started understanding that your questions were not always accusations. Sometimes they were invitations to honesty. Your silence was not always indifference. Sometimes it was exhaustion. Your boundaries were not punishment. Sometimes they were the only way you knew how to stop losing yourself. And the more they understood this, the more uncomfortable their own behavior became to remember. This is why the words, "one last time," carry so much weight. They do not know how many opportunities remain. They do not know whether you are still standing emotionally where you once stood. They do not know whether your heart has quietly begun to detach. Something about your energy feels different to them now. They sense that you are no longer willing to chase explanations forever. They feel that the version of you who once waited endlessly may be disappearing. And that frightens them more than they expected. Because they thought there would always be time. They thought the connection would simply remain suspended somewhere between almost and someday. They thought they could continue avoiding the deepest conversation and return when they felt ready. But recently, something shifted in their awareness. They realized that while they were protecting themselves from vulnerability, they may have been teaching you how to live without them. That thought shook them. They began imagining your future without their presence in it. They imagined you laughing freely with someone who does not make you question where you stand. They imagined someone else recognizing the value they kept hesitating to acknowledge. They imagined you no longer checking for their message, no longer wondering whether they would finally speak, no longer leaving a hidden space open for the possibility of them. And suddenly, the silence they once used as protection started feeling like a threat. Not a threat from you. A threat created by their own hesitation. There is more. They have been telling themselves a story about why everything became complicated. For a long time, that story made them feel safer. They blamed timing, circumstances, distance, stress, responsibilities, misunderstandings. They may even have convinced themselves that the connection was simply too difficult, that perhaps walking away emotionally would be easier than confronting what it awakened. But something happened recently that challenged that story. It may have been a conversation, a memory, a dream, a quiet realization during an ordinary moment. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of you. Perhaps someone said a sentence that unintentionally exposed what they had been avoiding. Whatever triggered it, the result was the same. They could no longer honestly say you were the reason they pulled away. They had to face themselves. And that is the revelation they never expected. The greatest obstacle was not the connection that it was their fear of becoming fully visible inside it. They feared you would see the parts of them they had hidden from everyone else. The insecurity beneath confidence. The tenderness beneath distance. The regret beneath stubbornness. The longing beneath silence. They did not know what would happen if you saw all of it and still had the freedom to choose whether to stay. So instead of risking rejection after complete honesty, they sometimes created distance before honesty could ever happen. But now they understand the cost. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize that protecting themselves from possible heartbreak may have created the very separation they feared. That is difficult for them to admit. Because this means they cannot simply blame circumstances anymore. They have to take responsibility for the moments when fear influenced their choices. And something extraordinary happens when a person finally becomes honest with themselves. The truth they avoided begins demanding expression. That is where they are now. There are sentences forming inside them that they never planned to say. I was scared. I misunderstood you. I acted like I did not care when I cared more than I wanted to admit. I thought keeping distance would protect me. I did not realize I was pushing away something I actually wanted. But even those sentences are not the deepest truth. There is something beneath them. Something more surprising. Your soulmate has been trying to determine whether what they feel is simply attachment, nostalgia, unfinished emotion, or something stronger. They have questioned themselves because the connection did not disappear when they expected it to. Time passed, distractions came, responsibilities filled their days, yet your presence continued returning to their thoughts in ways they could not explain. At first, they resisted it. They told themselves memory can be misleading. They told themselves familiarity can feel like destiny when it is only habit. They tried to be logical about something that did not behave logically inside them. But the more they tried to reduce what they felt, the more certain moments refused to fade. Your voice. The way you understood things they never fully explained. The emotional atmosphere around certain conversations. The strange comfort of being seen by someone who could also challenge them. The possibility of what could have existed if both of you had felt safe enough to speak honestly at the same time. They began realizing they were not only missing you. They were grieving what remained unfinished. That is different. Missing someone can fade. But unfinished truth keeps knocking. And now that knocking has become impossible for them to ignore. There is a reason their message feels urgent. They sense that something in your life is changing. Maybe you are becoming stronger. Maybe you are becoming busier. Maybe your attention is no longer tied to unanswered questions the way it once was. Perhaps you have begun choosing peace over confusion. They can feel, even if they cannot explain how, that you are reaching a point where you may no longer need the answers you once desperately wanted. And that creates a strange urgency in them. Because the moment they finally found the courage to speak may be the same moment you finally found the courage to stop waiting. This is the emotional crossroads. And heaven is not showing you this so that you abandon your boundaries or run toward uncertainty. You are being reminded that love does not require you to surrender your wisdom. Compassion does not mean ignoring patterns. Forgiveness does not mean returning to situations that repeatedly diminish your peace. If this person speaks, listen with both your heart and your discernment. Words can be beautiful, but truth is confirmed by consistency. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that too. They know they cannot simply arrive with emotion and expect everything to return to the way it was. They know a confession does not erase the impact of silence. They know saying, "I was afraid," may explain behavior, but it does not automatically repair it. That is part of why they have delayed this conversation. They are afraid you will ask the question they have been avoiding. What would be different now? And deep down, they know that question matters more than every romantic sentence they could possibly give you. Because love without change becomes repetition. Emotion without responsibility becomes another cycle. And this time, something inside them wants more than another cycle. They want a real chance to say what they should have said before. But there is another detail. One they have kept especially guarded. There was a period when they believed letting you go would make everything easier. They thought distance would eventually silence the feelings. They may have intentionally tried to redirect their attention. They may have filled their schedule, avoided certain reminders, or convinced themselves that moving forward meant never looking back. For a while, it seemed to work. Then something happened. They experienced a moment when they expected to feel completely fine without you, and instead the absence became clearer. It was not dramatic. No thunder. No extraordinary sign. Just a simple moment when they instinctively wanted to tell you something. And then remembered they could not. That ordinary moment revealed something enormous. You had become woven into the way they experienced life. Not because they were incapable of living without you, but because sharing certain parts of themselves with you had felt natural in a way they did not fully appreciate until the connection became uncertain. That recognition changed the question in their mind. They stopped asking, "Why can't I forget them?" and started asking, "Why did I make it so difficult to be honest with them?" That question opened the door to everything they are feeling now. But your soulmate has another confession, and this one may surprise you even more. They once believed you would always understand them without requiring them to explain themselves. They thought the depth of the connection meant you would somehow know what they meant even when their actions contradicted it. They expected you to see through their defenses, excuse their confusion, and remain emotionally available while they figured themselves out. Now they see how unfair that was. You are not meant to decode someone forever. Love should not require constant guessing. And they are finally understanding that you needed clarity too. You needed reassurance too. You needed to know whether you were building something real or holding on to possibility. This realization has humbled them. They are beginning to see that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. And they made honesty feel harder than it needed to be. That is why their heart keeps returning to the same plea. Please hear me out. Not because they believe they are entitled to another chance. Not because they think your heart belongs to them. But because there is something they do not want to carry unspoken forever. They want you to know that some of the moments you interpreted as indifference were actually fear. Some of the distance you interpreted as rejection was emotional confusion. Some of the silence you interpreted as forgetting was internal conflict. But listen carefully, because this matters. Understanding the reason does not require you to dismiss the effect. Your feelings were real too. Your confusion mattered. Your loneliness in those moments mattered. Your prayers for clarity mattered. The nights when you wondered whether you should hold on or move forward mattered. Heaven does not ask you to erase your experience simply because you finally receive an explanation. Instead, you are being invited into something stronger. Truth. Truth that does not romanticize pain. Truth that allows compassion without abandoning self-respect. Truth that can hold two realities at once. Your soulmate may have cared deeply, and they may also have handled that care poorly. That is maturity. And this next chapter, whatever form it takes, will require maturity from both sides. Your soulmate senses this. That is why they are not only thinking about what they want to say. They are thinking about what they may need to hear from you. They know you may tell them things they do not want to face. You may tell them how their inconsistency affected you. You may tell them that you became tired. You may tell them that while they were protecting their heart, you were slowly learning how to protect yours. And strangely, they are becoming more willing to hear it. Because they would rather face an uncomfortable truth than continue living inside a comfortable silence that leads nowhere. This is new for them. There was a time when they would have defended themselves immediately. There was a time when they would have explained every decision, justified every delay, or found a way to change the subject. But something has softened. They are beginning to understand that listening is part of love. Not listening in order to respond. Listening in order to understand. And they wish they had learned that sooner. Do not skip over what comes next, because this is where the message turns. Your soulmate has been thinking about a specific future moment. A conversation. Not an imaginary dramatic reunion. Not a perfect movie scene. A real conversation where nothing important is hidden. They imagine sitting with you, or speaking to you in whatever way becomes possible, and finally saying everything without protecting their image. They imagine admitting where they were wrong. They imagine telling you what they were afraid of. They imagine asking what you experienced instead of assuming they already know. And most of all, they imagine revealing something they have never said clearly before. Something about why you affected them differently. They have known other people. They have experienced attraction, connection, interest, affection. But something about you made them confront themselves. You reflected both what they wanted and what they were afraid they were not ready to receive. That is why your presence sometimes brought them peace and discomfort at the same time. You represented possibility. And possibility demands courage. They were not prepared for that. But they are becoming prepared now. Still, heaven whispers this gently: preparation is not the same as transformation. You do not have to decide anything based on potential. Watch what becomes real. If they return with honesty, notice whether honesty is accompanied by accountability. If they offer affection, notice whether affection is accompanied by steadiness. If they speak of the future, notice whether their present choices support those words. You are not being asked to become suspicious. You are being asked to remain awake. Because the deepest relationships are not built only on chemistry. They are built on emotional safety, truth, mutual effort, and the courage to remain present when conversations become uncomfortable. Your soulmate is learning this lesson now. And the urgency they feel is partly because they know you are learning it too. You are not the same person you were when this began. Something inside you has matured through the uncertainty. You have learned where you overextended. You have learned the difference between patience and self-abandonment. You have learned that waiting is only beautiful when something meaningful is also being built. You have learned that your heart can remain loving without remaining trapped. They can sense that strength. And perhaps that is why they finally want to speak. Because your growth has removed the illusion that you will always remain exactly where they left you. There is a strange irony in this connection. When you were reaching toward them, they were afraid. Now that you are learning to stand firmly within yourself, they are becoming brave. But do not mistake this for a game. Sometimes people only understand the value of honesty when they feel the consequences of avoiding it. Your soulmate is beginning to understand. And the next truth may be the most difficult one for them to admit. They have imagined losing you completely. Not temporarily. Not as part of another cycle. Completely. And instead of feeling relief, they felt grief. That grief answered a question they had been avoiding. You mattered more than they admitted. Still, there is one more layer. Their message is not only, "I cared." It is not only, "I was afraid." It is not only, "I made mistakes." There is a specific truth they have been protecting because saying it would change the entire meaning of what happened between you. It involves a choice they made when you thought they had forgotten you. A choice no one around them fully understood. A choice connected to why they suddenly became quieter, more distant, and harder to reach. You may have believed that distance meant they were choosing life without you. But what they were actually doing during that time was far more complicated. They were trying to make a decision about whether they should return and tell you everything, or walk away without ever revealing the truth. For days, perhaps longer, they carried that decision privately. And someone close to them noticed. That person asked why they seemed distracted. At first, your soulmate avoided answering. Then one day, they finally said something. Something about you. Something they had never admitted aloud before. The moment those words left their mouth, even they were surprised by how emotional they became. Because hearing themselves say it made the truth undeniable. And now those same words are the ones they want to bring directly to you. But before you hear what they said, you need to understand why they had kept it hidden for so long. There was one fear stronger than rejection. One possibility that terrified them more than losing control, more than admitting love, more than confronting the past. They were afraid that if they told you the full truth, you would finally understand just how deeply they had been affected by you. And once you understood that, there would be no place left for them to hide. No pretending. No emotional distance. No safe excuse. Only truth. That is why this confession has taken so long. But the hiding is almost over. Because the words they told that trusted person were not, "I miss them." They were not, "I made a mistake." They were not even, "I still care." What they said was something much more revealing. And when you hear the exact meaning behind it, you may finally understand why they are pleading with you now to hear them out one last time. Because what they admitted about you changes everything you thought you knew about their silence. And the most unexpected part is that their confession did not end with how they felt. It ended with what they had already decided to do about it.